There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to bring both liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats and independents together about stopping all this spending and all these wars overseas. So why don't we agree to just bring our troops home? The wars that we have been fighting are fought with no declaration. Presidents make the decision. Congress defers to the executive branch and allows the president to do it. But I can promise you, as president, I would never fight a war that is not endorsed by the people through a vote by the Congress. World War II, we were attacked by Japan, and the Germans declared war against us. In less than 4 years, we were able to defeat both of them. These were huge fights that we had to. We've been in Afghanistan for 10 years, and nobody knows when it's going to end. It keeps getting worse. And the more information we get out of, the more we are hearing from the military personnel, the more we find out that things aren't going well there. One indication, though, that should give a hint, but nobody outside of the people that might come to hear me will admit it, that is, the military people know exactly what I'm talking about, and they endorse this foreign policy by ending the war. And they do that by sending more money to our campaign, than 4 times more than all the Republicans put together, and twice as much as the president gets. But at that time there was no declaration of war. You know, it just goes on, and then the president's go to war. That was one of the things the revolution was fought about, because the king would declare the war and tax the colonists. And then the military came and occupied our country, and would go into their houses and occupy our houses. And matter of fact, they would go into houses without search warrants, just as our government's doing to us right now. The wars have been going on for so long, but nobody actually knows exactly why we're there. At least they don't tell us. Why were we in Iraq? Oh, because of weapons of mass destruction, because of Al-Qaeda. No weapons of mass destruction, no Al-Qaeda, and then we got in there. Guess what? Al-Qaeda's in Iraq right now, and they had no weapons of mass destruction. Now Iraq is more aligned with Iran. You know, and they're more allies because just of the politics of the nature, that we have too many unintended consequences of these things that we do around the world, just as it is in economics. Unintended consequences. We want to do good for people, we end up doing bad for the people. And going overseas, they tell us they're supposed to do this, you know, for the benefit of the people. But it really doesn't work. There's a lot of other special interests involved. There's a lot of special interests, from oil to wars that have been going on forever across the world. And the countries end up much worse shape, and we end up much more broke, and that is a big problem. So I'm for saving a lot of money from overseas and having a foreign policy of non-intervention, one the Constitution provides for, something the founders advised for us to do, and that is be friends with people, even if they're different and even if they aren't perfect. But we should certainly have a different foreign policy. What they usually say to me, and to any others who would agree, they say that we're a bunch of isolationists. But it really isn't. That is not what the founders wanted. They did not want to have, protectionism. They wanted to isolate our weapons. They didn't want to be aggressive with weapons, but they wanted to trade and be friends with people, practice diplomacy. You know, we have thousands and thousands of diplomats in Washington and around the world. I just wish they would be used once in a while. The president, there's been several others that had military experience, but the one most recently that had the most was, of course, Eisenhower. And he had very strong advice when he left. He says, watch out for the military-industrial complex. They may be promoting wars just to sell weapons. And boy, there is a lot of activity and a lot of credibility in that argument. But Eisenhower, was elected. He was elected to stop a war. Generally, the people, when they get the choice, they will pick the person that is least likely to start a war. And that happened last go around, but the first thing happened is we expanded the war in Afghanistan. But Eisenhower was elected. He was to stop the war. He said he'd go to Korea. He did that, and the war stopped. Not one more military person died after that during the Eisenhower administration of that whole 8 years. And he had a lot of opportunities to put in the troops. But he was a military man. He knew what it was like, and I just think he was more skeptical of this rapid response by putting troops in. Dien Bien Phu fell. The French were defeated there, and it wasn't until the next administration that the troops went in. But Eisenhower said, no, I'm not going to send the troops in there. There was a crisis in the Taiwan Straits, and that had to do with Taiwan, in the Formosa area, and China. He says, I'm not going to get involved in that. Let them deal with that. And I remember another time when Eisenhower was restrained, and that was in 1956, and that was during the Suez Crisis. The French and the British were over there, and they were going to make sure the Egyptians didn't take over the canal, so the French and the British and the Israelis were fighting, and they said, Eisenhower, you got to come in and help us because we're not doing so well. And Eisenhower said no. That was the day I said, boy, I'm glad of that. I was afraid I was going to be drafted right out of college on that. So, but Eisenhower, I thought, set a great precedent about how to be restrained. And today, though, we hear some of the other candidates, they do not sound very restrained. They sound like they're itching for a fight. I'll tell you what, I'm not itching for a fight, but we need to defend this country as necessary. If we have to, we fight and win. The last thing we need is to be sending troops and get further involved, because we're already involved in all those countries over there, further involved in Syria. It makes no sense whatsoever to get involved there, because there's too many that are so anxious, because they're anxious actually to go to Iran. Now that is about the most foolish thing in the world. So obviously some of the reason that we get involved over there has to do with Israel. And of course, we propped up a dictator. We've tried to buy friendship with Israel in Egypt. We spent about $40 billion. What happened? It didn't work. The people finally rejected it. Threw out that guy. Guess what? Al-Qaeda's in Egypt now. They're in Libya now. So this thing backfires on us. I think it hurts Israel, to tell you the truth. I think Israel can take care of themselves. They have nuclear weapons and powerhouse. But unfortunately, I think it backfires on them because they can't do anything without our permission, and they can't have peace treaties with their neighbors. And if they want to fight, if they think they have to have a border dispute, I think it should be their business and make their decisions. But this idea that we have to be trapped, and we have to pay the bills, and we have to be vulnerable, I just don't think it's the right way to do it. In 1998, the policy of this country changed to that of overthrowing Saddam Hussein. Because I remember talking about it on the House floor in 1998, and the lack of wisdom about going in there. But that finally came about. But when did it come about? After 9/11. 9/11 came. It was a terrible, terrible day, and we should wake us all up. But the one thing that I was convinced of then, and I can remain completely convinced, we were not attacked because we were free and rich. What was the first reaction? And I have pretty good evidence that the early discussion, matter of fact, even Paul O'Neill, the Secretary of the Treasury, was astounded at the first meeting of the White House under Bush in the year 2001 was, when are we going into Iraq? Well, when 9/11 occurred, they were ready to go. And it had nothing to do with 9/11. And it took, 10 years to get bin Laden? And yet they occupied two more countries, and 8,500 Americans died. We spent $4 trillion that accumulated into our debt. That was used as an excuse. Just as these conditions of war are used as an excuse for constant intrusion into our personal privacy and our personal liberties here at home. It was within days after 9/11 that a bill was brought to the floor. That bill had been floating around for quite a few years. And they brought it up and passed it. It was an hour or so of discussion. And that was that infamous Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was not very patriotic. It's a disaster. It destroyed essentially our Fourth Amendment rights. Now they can come into our houses without search warrant, and it's not getting much better. And it's also the authority used to intrude on our personal privacy and the so-called protection that they give us under the TSA at the airports. But it also, what it does though, it allows searches and seizures without proper search warrants. So this makes people who look a little bit different more vulnerable. This has an immigration connotation. People coming into this country, they look different, and they're going to be more vulnerable because they don't have to get proper search warrants. But the Patriot Act is very, very damaging. And it has led to other things too. Today, of course, we've had the president announced 1 year ago that he's allowed to assassinate American citizens just because he might be thought to be associated with somebody who might be a bad guy. I mean, an associated forces. And, of course, he's done it on 3 occasions, 3 assassinations of American citizens without real charges, without any charges. But he declared that they were the enemy of the country, and therefore this was the best thing to do. And then again, with the National Defense Authorization Act, the president can use the military to arrest anybody. And this means anybody, but there have to be associated forces, but nobody knows how to define it. But that is interpreted to mean by many, oh, associated means, you mean if I visit a web page, or I get certain email, or I attend a certain meeting, or I speak out, or I write a book, and it sounds like it's subversive, that you can be arrested by the military and put in prison indefinitely without a trial? I mean, this is very serious. This is undermining the basic principles of a true republic. So I believe very sincerely, for our republic to survive, those laws have to be removed from